Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vistara webinar, The Road to Hybrid Cloud at Epic Games. My name is Aki Naito from Vistara Marketing, and I will be your moderator today. If this is your first time to the program, welcome. Vistara is a proven SaaS platform for IT operations management. Our technology is over 5 years old with over 1,100 end customers, supported by over 100 partners on our platform. We've received great recognition for our product, including Gartner's Cool Vendor in IT Operations last year. And we serve enterprise and service provider customers to bring them a unified command center for their IT operations management. This event will be available on demand and available to share with your teams and your networks. And you can do that now by using the share button on the event player as well. After this event, I invite you to view other upcoming events and on-demand content that's available in this event channel as well. We'll have some votes. We encourage you to participate and see how your answers relate to the other viewers on this webinar. And we'll also have time for questions. Please use the Ask a Question button at any point throughout today's presentation, and we will handle questions at the end of the program. We are thrilled today to welcome Chris Gerhardt, CIO of Epic Games. I'd like to now turn things over to Varma Kunaparaju, CTO of Vistara, to drive our discussion with Chris to get his perspective and learnings at Epic and his other experiences.
Thanks, Aki. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you joined from. I'm delighted to have Chris Gerhardt on the call today to share some thoughts about hybrid cloud strategy, the opportunity for enterprises to adopt hybrid cloud and hybrid cloud related solutions to meet the IT and IT common needs. But before we get going on the chat with Chris, I would like to kind of share what we have been hearing from enterprises that we have been engaged with around cloud and cloud adoption. And then I will turn over the mic to Chris Gerhardt to introduce himself and his experience and make it as a chat between various hybrid cloud explorations that Chris has come across. What we have been hearing about cloud and cloud adoption, in our mind, and when we speak to the enterprises, the initial adoptions of public clouds, specifically public clouds, were driven by the DevOps groups, individual business units who have dev test workloads that they wanted to experiment in public clouds, is the first wave of public cloud adoptions that we have seen in enterprises. But of late, we've been seeing enterprise, corporate, central IT organizations along with the C-level executives and board members in the enterprises are asking the central IT organizations to go take a look at what cloud means for them and what their adoption looks like. If you look at the budgets today, a very small portion of those budgets are controlled by the dev and business units, but in the central IT, it still controls large portions of corporate IT budgets. And those corporate IT budgets are spread between various infrastructure elements that they need to provide to the business units in the form of IT as a service, whether it is hardware, software, applications that the central IT is controlling, or in the form of private and public clouds that they are consuming and then making them available to the business units. Given that, if you look at the industry research around the hybrid cloud and cloud adoption, both 451 Group and IDC and many other Gartner and many other public research forums were communicating is the public cloud adoption by central IT is the second wave of things that are going to come. The context for that is to hear from a matured IT organization and a CIO who has been both on central corporate IT side and on the cutting edge more DevOps-driven IT organizations, to hear his perspective on how the cloud and cloud adoption in the central IT is looking like. We have Chris Gerhardt today to share his thoughts. Today's context again is to give how IT in an enterprise that is on the bleeding edge of cloud adoption thinking about hybrid cloud. And Chris is a thought leader, has been on both sides of the decisions, cloud decisions. So I would like to turn a little bit here and make Chris to intro himself and tell a little bit about Chris and Chris's background.
Okay. Thanks, Varma. I appreciate it. So, yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I've been in IT longer than I'm willing to admit. I started off in the mostly development of online systems in the 90s. Transitioned to being an executive in IT and corporate IT for a number of years, with responsibility for both development and shared platforms and mission critical systems in the financial services industry. Spent a bit of time actually on I guess you could say the vendor side, leading strategy on how cloud adoption is going to transform that business model, and then more recently with Epic, which we'll certainly get into later, where we're seriously adopting cloud technology for some of our products, and we're transitioning from a legacy IT environment to a hybrid cloud environment.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Chris, you've been a CIO for Epic Games, but you had over 15 years as an executive in IT, both on mature IT organizations. And Chris worked in telecommunications, financial services, media industries, an extensive background in variety of IT initiatives that the large enterprises have seen. And we are very delighted to have you, Chris, today. Thanks for joining and sharing willing to share some of your thoughts on cloud and cloud adoptions and cloud decision-making processes that you have gone through, both at Epic and prior to Epic in your career.
Okay. Thank you.
So with that, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about Epic? What is Epic and Epic Games is, and maybe some of our audience don't know who Epic is.
Yeah, Epic Games has been in business for I think a little over 20 years now. Two primary products, probably most known initially for Unreal Tournament. If there's any gamers out there, they'll be familiar with that, and the Unreal Engine, which is really a tool set, 3D modeling, graphics modeling tool set for the creation of games or experiences. It's used. The Unreal Engine's been used and is currently being used by a lot of AAA, game publishers. And that's really the two areas, is games and the engine. Now on the engine side, there's a lot of applications that are very exciting in the future, in the arena of virtual reality, the VR stuff that's coming out. There's applications there in real estate for, architectural modeling beyond gaming. And, the transition we're going through right now is moving from packaged software, classic enterprise software sold to predominantly businesses to allow people to have access to the Unreal Engine, instead of hundreds of customers using the Unreal Engine at great cost to develop high-end products. We've begun distributing that for free to pretty much anybody who wants to download it. And The idea being that the next wave in interactive media will be effectively the operating system that people standardize on. So that's ongoing. That's affecting our online operations right now. And then on the games front, the big push has been to move to a free-to-play model. So free is the theme. And we have a game in development that will be launching. Certainly we launched in alpha, but will go to a larger and larger audience over the next couple of years. That is a compelling experience game, for all ages. That's free to play, and we're still maintaining our business, with providing these solutions to other major manufacturers of games and other products. So that's basically the business model. Maybe a little bit about the IT environment. I mean, I should tell you a little bit about our locations as well, but we have a global footprint, pretty much around the world: Japan, South Korea, locations across the U.S., UK, and Lower Europe. And our IT environment is pretty classic sort of IT environment. You have data centers, or one primary data center with some other branch solutions, et cetera, around the globe. So when we set out last year to provide these online products, it was a brand new move, and there was obviously a big difference between classic IT and the whole DevOps transformation and cloud transformation that's been going on with Amazon and Google and everyone else. So we've built out that environment, which I'll get into, I think, a bit later, just in response to some of the questions. But yeah, our online environment includes all of the major hosting providers you can imagine. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Internet, SoftLayer, et cetera. All for different purposes. Some we're investigating. Some will probably have more to do with business relationships and the various gaming platforms we use. But that's an overview of the company. Is that good enough, Arma, or would you like me to drill down somewhere else?
That's fantastic. That was good. Chris, we'll get into more details on potentially your cloud implementations and things like that during the rest of the conversation today. But thanks. That was very impressive. We know Epic is a premier gaming company and known for having a very advanced technology and a sophisticated IT team, right? Tell me a little bit about your role at Epic and what is your biggest priority as part of the IT organization.
Okay, so yeah, I was brought on around February of last year, and this is really right on the cusp of the launch to online. So Epic realized that it was a totally different problem of scale, and they needed to kind of look at everything top to bottom from their IT and operations perspective. So I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to come to Epic and really just throw myself into both sides of that problem. One, the corporate IT, classic IT transformation problem. And that's at the data set, from the desktop to the data center. Really, what are the implications of IT as a service, for lack of a better term, to how we do IT, and then the online side where you have really a different people with a different set of skills, DevOps, tech ops. The operations challenges are different, but yeah, the basic mission was to transform Epic's approach to technology. And the first and foremost, as far as priorities for the organization, were to launch the online products, to get them live. The initial strategy is, let's get our first our product out there live, to start building, building the business, start gaining customers, and working out our operations and our hosting strategy. And really, it was more of a rolling start to try and get basically the skeleton of what we need out there, and then really evolve it from there in a continuous improvement perspective. The other sort of key aspect is just ensuring that we provide the best possible user experience. From my perspective on the hosting side, that certainly comes down to availability and performance, and a lot of the abilities, as they say, secure and everything else, but all the way up the stack to the application, that's the focus of the organization, is to provide the best possible experience, whether that's in gaming or the best possible tools to do your projects or create your games or whatever you're going to do with the engine.
Great. So, Chris, can you tell a little bit about what, you kind of mentioned that you will, as part of your organization, giving technology as a service or IT as a service, what does that delivering IT as a service mean for you?
Yeah, I think at a high level, one of the problems with IT, just historically, and the real reason for rogue IT, and cloud is probably the most recent example of rogue. It's just much easier to go rogue with IT now than it used to be. Now all you need is a credit card. You used to have to actually rack and stack equipment in a closet before. But the problem is that IT organizations tend to collapse in on a kind of a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles culture, where they're more interested in control, which is a big part of our job, is controlling security risks, making sure policies are enforced, et cetera, and we lose sight of the customer. So IT as a service to me really means, you start with a point of, no service is good service, and what I mean by that is self-service, making it, frictionless for our customers or users to be able to access the services that we provide. Well, that means empowerment to the users, and that's why a lot of the software as a service and cloud-based technologies are so compelling to the business, is because they've done a much better job than most organizations, internal IT departments, in providing that sort of frictionless engagement process. And the other part of IT as a service is, I think, really just being deliberate about what we do in IT. You can wrap this in ITIL and a lot of other things, understanding what services you're going to provide, what those offerings are, and then really just having a very, audacious goal to delight our users, not just to meet their needs. But what I've always told the team is we need to be, less like the DMV and more like the Ritz-Carlton. So that's really what IT as a service means to me at the kind of philosophical level. Now that manifests in self-service portals and service catalogs and, quickly being able to ramp up capabilities, at the press of a keyboard. So that's what it means to me.
Pretty cool. I think let's now turn to the core of the agenda, which is our audience would like to understand the cloud strategy, and next set of questions, Chris, is towards more your thoughts on Epic's cloud strategy today, and give us a little bit about the approach that you did and your strategy that you put in place at Epic.
Yeah, okay. So I guess there's a lot of ways to come at this, but let's start at the higher level. One of the problems with cloud strategy, just right out of the gate, is, it used to be that as a CIO, you would make a decision and you might have a couple years before that decision looked ridiculous and stupid, because of technology changes. In the current environment, the changes are so rapid. Pricing is changing, technologies are changing. It's just a real rapid pace of change. Developing a long-term strategy is untenable in many ways, because so many of the fundamental assumptions that go into your strategy can change. So I'll start with that. But at the next level down, it's not so much about cloud from an ethics perspective. We have some hard financial targets for our hosting costs that have to be met, and those are driven not by adding up all the costs in order to deliver a service, but by what our revenue models are quite frankly, and those hard financial targets are what we're attempting to hit. So that kind of feeds in. Now, obviously, in addition to that, you have the user experience, the flexibility, a lot of the other capabilities, but that kind of goes into the mixer. And then when you look at public versus private, to put it in those terms, I mean, I would define it as, infrastructure as a service, external vendor-delivered infrastructure as a service, because you could go infrastructure as a service and it's not, necessarily multi-tenant environments. You could have, secure VPCs, et cetera, so they're effectively, you're operating as your own gear. But, not to belabor that point, I mean, I think it's on the public versus private side, the cost and pricing are really two different things. So getting at what the TCO is of your, if I'm going to build it myself, really understanding all of the costs and risks that go into that, the risks that you're taking. And then on the other side, on the public side or cloud side, there are a different set of risks. And that is just the way it is with advances in technology is you're usually trading problems. A certain number of problems are going away, but it creates some new ones. So some of the first areas we looked at in public versus private would obviously be on the variable load side. If you can imagine, you publish a game, there's an immediate spike of usage, and then, as the game's been out there a while, you start to settle down. So right off the bat, we know we have to have variable or burst capacity, as it's called sometimes, within our infrastructure. So that pretty much tells us that we need that capability. We can't just buy all of the gear we need to cover the peak concurrent users. And then you have a base load side. Now, on the public versus private side, it's really financial terms is the way I look at it. If you buy gear, there's a certain cost associated with that. It's amortized over 3 or 4 years. So what you're really doing is buying long-term capacity, whether you host it or, but there's nothing saying you can't structure financial deals with external providers or even cloud providers and develop financial terms where you basically lock in long-term capacity. There's some diminishing returns once you go beyond 1 year with most of the pricing models, but that aside, that's kind of how we're looking at hybrid. So the other problem is, I guess, you have to talk a little bit about security and understanding the implications of security and how you're going to manage that. But and those problems change and are different depending on whether you go public, private. So those are some of the considerations that go into public versus private, and it's an and for us, not an or. Some of the things we're currently, I guess you could say, struggling with or following very closely would be just all the crazy number of options that we have and alternatives. We're deploying a product that's going to be, used, distributed and used around the globe. There are options within options. I mean, you can do bare metal leasing. You can do containers as a service. You can do, certainly, classic virtualized infrastructure as a service. You could do colo with particular equipment. What's the cost associated with that, right? And then what are all of the operational costs and operational complexities that go along with that? And the takeaway from a strategic perspective is we just don't, we're just in a much better position, I think, if we lean heavily as we go with the new products on cloud. And as we gain a clearer understanding of where the users are, what the workload patterns are, then just making sure we architect it in such a way so that we can then do a bottom line exercise to optimize cost and performance by going private. So I think that's basically, at a high level. Now, obviously, the other considerations on public versus private are really have to do with the operational complexities. From an operations perspective, it adds a lot of difficulty in how I'm going to manage all these different environments that simultaneously exist, right? With different vendors, internal, external, and we need to have a way of being able to manage the services that we're delivering to customers, even if they span multiple hosting providers, cloud, public, private, et cetera. Yeah. So it is, just to reiterate on that, I guess it is really an and, not so much an or, and it's where do you draw the line? Now I've talked a lot about the product side, where we're going online with these products. I should probably talk a little bit about the IT side, the transformation that's happening with our back-end applications and services. And that's really more a matter of, kind of a classic approach, or what's becoming a classic approach of just doing your application analysis and then asking a simple question for each application, and that is it ready for software as a service? And if the answer to that is yes, then we've worked with the business to actually migrate to a software as a service from an on-prem, and then, public cloud in that sense just becomes SaaS. So, and then you have the platforms, collaboration platforms. Should we stay with, an on-prem solution? I think that's a foregone conclusion. Nowadays, you're either going Office 365 or you're going Google ecosystem. So, and we've just gone through workload by workload and are, have developed a strategy from a, transformation of the legacy apps over. And I'm here to tell you that it's an and as well, because there are just some applications that are just not ready. There's some applications that have data transfer intensity that just makes it untenable to have it off-site. So that, I don't know if I've been clear, Varmi. You can drill in further if you'd like me to highlight some of the strategy.
And that's perfect, Chris. I think with operations playing a critical role, not just the technology making, driving certain aspects of your IT needs between private and public, but the operations piece comes into play. Can you dig into a little bit about the management and how this and or function between private and public cloud is handled, with the transformation of DevOps and DevOps related things driving some changes in the operations side? Can you dig a little bit into the operations and the management side?
Yeah, so I guess the aspects of a hybrid environment, you have, as it currently stands, we have, a whole plethora of tools that enable us to, if say you're in an Amazon environment or Google Cloud, there are a number of tools that enable us to do kind of drill down analysis of the various environment or the various components of the environment at an infrastructure level to get data. So you have kind of forensic tools that you use for troubleshooting or for analysis. But on the operations side, as far as, just classic NOC, something goes wrong in the environment, being able to detect it and hopefully prevent there actually being an effect to the end user. That is a challenge if you're in a hybrid environment, because you have two different problems. In one context, the level that you're monitoring at isn't at the hardware level. I mean, you're basically looking at CPU and you're looking at, the elements that you can look at within a cloud environment. But in your own, owned gear, you have the entire stack to manage. So being able to have a kind of central I guess you could say command center that enables you to see how the services are mapped to the infrastructure, regardless of where, whether they're in Amazon or whether they're in Amazon and, another hosting provider, is important from an operations perspective. And then you have the workforce side of the operations where you have teams, spanning the globe and all looking at the environment from different perspectives. It is also, crucial to have, that sort of command center where you can kind of see everybody seeing the same thing and kind of operating off the same information. So that touches a little bit on the, on kind of a CMDB view, but also just a mapping and bringing together the alerts and the CMDB and the mapping from the application level or service level all the way down to the infrastructure. So yeah, that's a critical component of hybrid for sure.
Great. Yeah, related to that is what are the challenges that your organization is dealing with in the management side today, given that your environment is pretty mixed?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Given that your environment and your needs are spread between various locations, what are some of the challenges that your organization is dealing with on the management side?
Yeah, on being able to manage the systems, I guess, or organizational, if you wanted to put it that way. I think there's certainly a tension, between, I guess maybe I'll come up with an example. So kind of the old model or classic model. If I'm going to deploy new infrastructure, new router or new classic infrastructure. Most of the models that were involved in, the speed at which changes are actually introduced into the infrastructure was significantly less, than it is now. But in virtualization, and this is true of on-prem and off, just the ability to stay up with what changes the application team is driving through new releases and the kind of dynamic spin up, spin down sort of environments in the cloud, keeping up with those from an operations perspective is difficult to be able to ensure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to changes or new things being entered into the environment, and that people understand the implications of those changes, or they're on they know about them. So that's created some challenges. I think it's still all of the stuff's there. Change management. It just it necessitates a more rapidly moving change management process that can deal with the ability to make those changes very, very rapidly. And, somebody hits a button and can, spin up hundreds of servers, in a single key, enter key. How do you make sure that the operations team's on board with that? They understand how to manage it once it goes live. So it kind of goes to, maintaining a shared understanding, I guess, is the management challenge across all teams of what's going on. So, we're addressing that with, by continuously improving our processes, trying to really work through how all of the teams interact and what our change management process should look like going forward, how to improve it. And then on the monitoring side, just, all sorts of monitoring events coming in. How do you deal with the masses of events coming in and determine what is really an issue affecting user experience, what will affect user experience, or what things we just don't know that they're having any impact. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think you answered the question. The quick highlight there is that as the DevOps groups are building and deploying a lot of releases that are going on, and your command centers potentially needs to kind of get the visibility while these deployments are going on. The ability to kind of make the command center operate while the DevOps groups are deploying the builds is potentially an interesting piece of problem that most of the enterprises that we've been talking to, particularly those who adopted cloud and significant portions of their workloads into the cloud, that has been a challenge on how the DevOps groups building the new code and deploying the code, whereas the command center needs to keep the application live and getting the API level controls and the management challenges. That did you see any of those challenges where how often do you deploy the builds? Do you see the builds as the DevOps groups are deploying the builds, the kind of management challenges that can you address specifically the DevOps related, build related, deployment related challenges that you saw?
Oh yeah, so this kind of touches on continuous release sort of development models, and we're not quite there yet, but certainly releases happen every day. Whether it's patching, minor releases or patches to majors, and those happen all the time across products. So, new products being offered, an environment gets spun up, and all of a sudden we see that there's a new environment, a new, whole Java, architecture deployed from from database, app server, web server just appears, and we're trying to say, okay, well, what is this, where did this come from, how should we manage this, et cetera, and, clamping down, people having the tremendous power to be able to deploy things into production or to shut them down. We're trying to strike that balance between productivity and velocity and kind of, maintaining a stable operation. So if you swing too far on one side, you end up with a sort of, locked down environment that really doesn't take advantage of a lot of the automation that's out there. And if you swing too far the other way, you have too much unmanaged change entered into the environment. So yeah, we ran into that. The first set of problems were our monitoring wasn't really set up to automatically enroll the new devices that come in, but early on we got that. So in the deployment scripts that all of the elements would self-enroll, and then the next elaboration on top of that was we could understand as part of the deployment process, we just made sure that the ongoing management processes were considered as well. We still have knowledge transfer issues, between the people who develop the systems and deploy them, and having, the same degree of knowledge so that we can, manage the life cycle of that infrastructure effectively based on the application that's running. So, yeah, I don't know if does that answer what you were driving at?
Absolutely. It's fascinating, what we hear about how Epic automated the whole deployment, where new build from an Ansible script or something like that not only deploys the entire workload and spins up all the infrastructure to kind of really bring that workload, whether it is spanning across pure public cloud or public and private portions, and then making those spun up instances and the workloads show in command center and dashboard, and how you kind of really automate it end to end to build an operating command center that gives visibility and an application and service level availability is a very fascinating story. And I think many enterprises who are looking at DevOps and who are looking at cloud adoption are specifically trying to kind of solve the problem that you and your team at Epic really solved in a very innovative way. And that's what I was alluding to. Quick deviation, Chris, thanks for that. Quick deviation from where, from Epic side to more, you are the thought leader, you who have been breathing cloud, have explored all kinds of converged infrastructures, private clouds, and, obviously with your role at Epic and, big portions of that getting explored in public cloud. Can you tell a little bit about how do you consider the workloads that go into the public cloud and some of the decision processes that you follow to keep private or on-premise for certain portions of the workload?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a problem. I understand it's okay using the term workload among friends. We can use that word, but actually, when the rubber comes down to where the rubber meets the road, there really isn't an answer to the question of what you do with the workload. You have to go to the level of each workload, meaning application that's running, right? Each application that's running, that entire architecture, you really start with the maturity in the public space of, say, software as a service. That's the first place to start, right? So like the analysis, a good example of this would be Exchange, right? You're running Exchange environment with SharePoint, and of course that leads you down the path of Link from a video conferencing perspective, which leads you down the path to, there is a well-defined sort of ecosystem around Microsoft. The decision isn't, you can certainly focus on the decision of whether I should host Exchange, my own, private Exchange on infrastructure in my data center, or I should host it on infrastructure as a service from provider A, B, or C, or whether I should move it to a colo. That's kind of one sort of IT analysis, but the more powerful analysis is actually to get with the business and say, okay, which ecosystem do you really want to operate with, Office 365 or Google? And drive that change. And then, obviously then there's no decision really at the infrastructure level. So you get those low-hanging fruit kind of off, those decisions made first on the application. Same thing can be applied to CRM, you know what I mean? Are you going to go, I don't think anybody's on Siebel anymore, but you're going Salesforce if you have an on-prem solution, Oracle, CRM, or something like that. And then you need to look at the legal system and the financial systems and make a decision on, okay, well, how ready is this, this provider? And it's really a business decision that drives it. So once those are kind of off the table and have been dealt with, then the next level that I recommend you really take, and I think this is pretty much best practice out there, is to then look at the platforms that you're supporting, whether those are database platforms or other applications, and then ask the question, well, there is no software as a service really available for this, or the software as a service doesn't meet our needs for whatever reason. Then there's a myriad of options that you just look at and say, well, what are the advantages of moving to cloud from a cost, reliability, DR perspective? I mean, there's a lot of DR advantages if you're running on cloud infrastructure. But there's even a readiness there that has to be assessed, right? Of how well does this application run in a virtualized environment? That would be one of the tests. So there's existing frameworks out there that I think are pretty much spot on as far as evaluating the workloads. There's plenty of partners that you can go through that have that pretty much baked. But once you get through all those that sort of analysis, then it's really just a roadmap. And prioritizing what you're going to do when, and there's a business case for each and every one of those. So that kind of leads you to led me to the point, certainly, that it really is about price performance. It's about what's best for the business, and when you look at cost, it has to be all inclusive. Operations, security risk, compliance, all of those. But you can eat that elephant one bite at a time by just breaking down the problem and just realize that at the end of any, certainly within the foreseeable future, very, very likely you're still going to have a lot of workloads left that are in your data center. And then I guess the final question would be, do you want to have a data center if you have one? Maybe go to a colo, and there's nothing wrong with that, and almost always works. But there are considerations there as well. So, but yeah, I always say video didn't kill radio. And at least it hasn't killed it yet. So, that's basically what I foresee in the next 5 years. So each organization kind of has to look at it in their own context. But certainly, any organization I can envision is already probably in hybrid if you include SaaS. And there are considerations from an operations perspective that need to be dealt with. it's highly likely that organizations that, IT organizations that don't think they're in the cloud probably are, if they actually talk to the business. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. So I don't know if that kind of hits on that's my thought on hybrid is yes. I guess if the answer to that question, yes, it'll be hybrid. And that's how we've gone through the process of kind of making decisions. And that's an ongoing process that I think will continue as long as I'm at Epic, until everything's been migrated. Then there'll be the next big thing that we have to migrate to.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. On the cloud strategy, how do you see the measure? How do you measure the success, and how do you see Epic's cloud strategy evolving in the next couple of years? That's in the horizon for you from various news that you are seeing.
On the online side, I'm not really sure at this point, to be quite honest. I mean, I have some ideas, but when I arrived, I had some ideas, and once you get down to the details, you find out reality's getting in the way of those ideas. But yeah, I mean, I think I started with thinking that we would certainly need to go with a hybrid and start spinning up infrastructure, certainly in Europe and the U.S., just because of it being cost prohibitive. But as we analyzed it and really started looking at the cost over time, we realized that we're going to deploy to cloud, but probably we're very interested in the containerization capabilities, the ability to separate from the specifics of the cloud provider so that we can move those workloads between cloud providers without it being too disruptive. So that's where I think probably the next big step is probably containerization of our cloud workloads so that we can bring them back easily to either on-prem or colo or another provider. On the IT side, I think in our particular environment we may be able to go all cloud, but we're probably 3 to 4 years away from. We have one workload like our build system, which has many terabytes that need to flow around between the user and the data center, and those data transfers are just really hard to justify just from a timing perspective. It's not even cost, but yeah, I think we'll certainly be shrinking the footprint.
Okay, got it. Before we jump into the question and answer from the audience, 3 1-minute answers to questions for you, Chris. Where it's like almost like a 5-side question from what's top of mind as a CIO. What keeps you at night?
Literally, outages that are discovered by my boss before I know, right? Probably the daily cost report that I get from hosting providers, that's going to turn, and it does at times turn in the wrong direction. Makes it hard so cost management probably is another one. And then keeping my team, the team on online operations working at a pace they can maintain over the long term. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And given where we are in the life cycle, there's just a lot of really, I have a lot of dedicated people working for me, but not to take advantage of that and to make sure that it's a sustainable pace that we're at. That keeps me up.
Okay. What are the trends that you are most interested in?
Well, probably first and foremost, I'll mix both together. I mentioned containerization. That's very interesting. I'm very interested in how we might implement Chaos Monkey and some of the Netflix and Google models that are out there for kind of the new infrastructure is very compelling to me. One that came up recently was, just this idea of cloud storage, where instead of having all of our master data kept centrally in our data center, maybe keeping it all in a cloud provider, and then like a CDN almost, keeping caching servers that basically cache the active storage, almost like a CDN node at every branch. That seems to be very transformational, and there's EMC is working on or has a solution in that arena. Panzera is another company. Very interesting. Pricing of the cloud as something that is really of interest to me is how long will the 30% drop off in price, per year continue. AppStream or cloud-based VDI for high-end workstations is something that I'm working, closely with, Amazon on to find out what the limits of the tech are. If that problem, that's why I said it's about 3 to 4 years out, is if we could achieve a point where you get 1080p, 30 frames a second to the desktop, and you really can handle the user experience problem, and we could keep all of the data off the client, you could really improve the user experience. Now, there are a bunch of problems with, they're difficult to solve there, but it's an interesting area. And then, totally not, I guess it's technology related, but I just am intrigued by Bitcoin. So I don't know if that has to do with this conversation, but that's what I'm interested in.
Got it. How do you stay on top of the latest? That's my last and final question before we open up for Q&A.
Yeah, I think it's primarily my personal network of folks that I know. I'm surrounded by a lot of really smart people that certainly have their sources that they stay up on things. Interestingly enough, I do take sort of certain vendor meetings. I'll get these crazy requests and hear something about a new tech or whatever, and I want to do that. And of course, there's conferences, et cetera, you can go to where you improve that networking side, but usually it's backward looking, not too forward looking at the conferences. It's established tech usually there, but tech blogs are good. Wired, various random things you find on the internet.
Thank you, Chris. And I will hand it over to Aki at this point to see and to field questions from our audience.
Sure. Thank you, Varma, and thank you, Chris. This is incredibly insightful to get your perspective on what you're doing in cloud and from all of your previous experience as well. We have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. If I can throw these over to you. So first is, can you fill us in on how your oversight of your cloud strategy is of vital importance to your game customers? Some end user perspective would be good to hear about. Gamers are in a way the most demanding customers you can deal with, right?
Yeah, I'll fill you in on the oversight of the cloud strategy. Yeah, I mean, I think we're apart from cost and everything else. Yeah, the one thing you can't lose sight of, this kind of goes to the customer focus, right? Not being the DMV. Yeah, the thing you're really shooting for is the best possible user experience. So the way that isn't so much cloud strategy, because you can host just about anywhere, but it's meeting the user experience requirements that are there. So obviously I wouldn't want to consider an option that is really elegant and kind of cool, but the user ends up having a bad experience. That wouldn't be good. Where it affects the user experience affects me most is on the operations side, really filling in the gap on how do we know when there's a problem before the user contacts us, right? So I would love, without being Big Brother, I would love to know how we can detect issues right away, and so that somebody's buying something in our online catalog or whatever, it's a neat hat or a car in a game or whatever, that we can manage that process. So yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it all starts and ends with the user.
Okay. The next question we had was, what are your thoughts on wireless and smartphone visibility and policy setting?
wireless and smartphone visibility policy settings. So I think maybe policy setting on wireless and smartphones. So I'm assuming this is on the IT side, and being able to set policies around their use, I'm assuming. So it'd be kind of like mobile device management. I hope I'm getting this right, or I'm just inventing a question and then answering it. Yeah, I mean, I think we're taking a fairly classic approach. There's nothing innovative there. We do have bring your own device as far as phones are concerned, and we do have an MDM, agent that is downloaded and enforces some policies. The real rub there is on the policy side. It's really more working with the business to figure out or let them know what the trade-offs are around policy. And I'm just passionate about looking for, breaking up this trade-off, this sort of between usability and flexibility and security. And I'm just really interested in any time I can kind of make the user experience better and more secure, as opposed to one being the enemy of the other. I don't know what the setting part of the question is, but hopefully I provided some value in that answer. I don't know exactly how to answer it.
Okay. So we have about 2 minutes. If you had, you spoke about DevOps adoption at Epic Games. If you had a quick 1-minute best practice for enterprises that are just getting their feet wet, what would you advise them?
DevOps adoption?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So the workforce transformation side is in IT is something that I think people need to take seriously. It's great to talk about the technology of going to the cloud, but much like in the 90s with the move to distributed systems from mainframe, there's a sea change in skill sets that needs to be considered. And I don't believe there are enough resources out there, trained resources out there. DevOps skill, is a bit developer and also, kind of passionate about infrastructure and operations. So it's a weird mix of skills from a classic IT perspective, and that's exactly who you need for software-defined data centers and networking and all of that. So the way I've been approaching it is really just working with the existing staff from a career planning perspective, certainly seeding on the team people who have experience, but I'm not thinking in terms of, rip and replace, because I don't think there's a replacement, a bunch of DevOps, skilled folks that are just out there, waiting for a job. They're all employed. That's what I found. So I think we've got to make our own, make our own gold, right? So we just there's a real opportunity for people who are motivated and love to learn to transition from an infrastructure administrator of some kind to this new model, DevOps or TechOps. So that's the advice I would give, is just take into consideration the workforce transformation that's needed.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. This will be available, and I think we're going to end our session today. We've reached the hour. Thank you so much again, Chris, for your insight. I think we've learned a lot about hybrid, about all the things that you've been doing at Epic and beyond. Again, thank you for joining. This webinar will be available for replay if you'd like to listen to it again or share with any of your network or colleagues.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Aki.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.